So I have to admit I'm not used to this kind of applause when I normally give my lectures in the academic setting, so it's wonderful to have this reception. I would also like to thank Ilchi Lee for giving me this opportunity and this privilege to speak here at this historical moment. And so far it's been a wonderful experience. I think it's every time I get involved in or get invited to one of these events that Ilchi Lee is behind, it's always another big surprise how far this has taken. I also want to say this moment is particularly pertinent because obviously many parts of the world are have been moving in the opposite direction to this Earth Citizen movement. Unfortunately, also the United States. So I think seeing this is also enlightened by seeing the Women's March last week. So I see this as a similar response of the world to that some human beings seem to be attracted to another model of the world that cannot lead to something positive. So I was going to start to just say a couple of personal words how I got involved with Ilchi Lee's organizations and his philosophy and his accomplishments. So I was invited to speak at a conference in Los Angeles. I had no idea about the brain-body centers. I actually didn't even want to meet with Fatima, who was the person who came to my office, but she was so persistent. She stayed in the office until I showed up from some meeting. And I ended up giving a talk there to the kind of appropriate topic to my own interest, healthy gut, happy brain. And I realized that I have a few things in common with Ilchi Lee. One is that we were born in the same year, that we found out at this meeting. Also that we both liked Sedona. I organized 15 years ago a interdisciplinary mind-body symposium with scientists and traditional practitioners. But also what I really realized at this meeting is that our view of the importance of the brain and the digestive system was completely shared, and the more I get involved with people that are part of this movement, the more I realize how similar these views are. So the motto of our center at UCLA is bringing the brain back into medicine, because I always felt that our medical students are not even being trained that there's a brain that regulates health and disease. So to see that there's a whole movement, a growing movement out there was wonderful. So that was followed by Ilchi Lee inviting me to another memorable event, going to Korea. I happened to be at a meeting in Japan, and he asked me if I could just spend a couple of days hopping over to Korea and visiting him there, and particularly getting to know some of these institutions, the Brain Education University, and also the Benjamin School. So whatever was said earlier today, I can totally feel was one of the most emotional moments for me to go there and see these children having come from sort of an aversive environment to great accomplishments and self-confidence. So it was really wonderful. And then the Kokak Qigong Festival also was a remarkable experience. So, and then just last week I was in New York, again, an invitation that wasn't really synchronized. So I was invited to do an interview there for the Brain World magazine earlier, and a memorable experience at the UN, at a conference at the UN headquarters, about poverty eradication and mental well-being. When I was asked to speak there, I said, I can't really say anything about this. I'm a physician, a neuroscientist, a gastroenterologist. There's really nothing that I can say to this topic. It turned out preparing for this talk was actually a very good exercise to make me realize how much there is a connection between socioeconomic status and the well-being of the brain-gut interaction. Let me tell you a few words about what I'm doing in our research. I will not bore you with any details of the science, because that's not really the time to speak about this. But I do want to emphasize a few things that I think are really, it's been mentioned before, people have talked about paradigm shifts. It's something that is happening at the scientific level as well. So I've studied the brain-gut interaction throughout my career. Came to Los Angeles, UCLA for that purpose, really, but nobody really was interested until a few years ago, until the microbiome was discovered and led to this explosive exponential growth in science related to the microbiome. And all of a sudden, everybody is a brain-gut microbiome expert. There's a growing number of books in every magazine, everything, you can see it. So my concept about this, really based on some 4 decades of studying the system, is the following. And I would like to sort of title this the science of connectedness that we're experiencing, and that is the paradigm shift. We are going from the old model, the linear thinking, to something that we realize we've hit a concrete wall in going further in our understanding or in developing new therapies unless we change that paradigm. And so what you see here is the brain on the one side and the gut on the other side. The terminology connectome is now being applied. That shows you how the paradigm is shifting to every complex system, because we know everything has to be connected in order to be understood. At the brain, we have made tremendous progress through brain imaging to dissect these different the limbic circuits, the emotional circuits, the cognitive, the attentional, the pain inhibitory, the memory circuits. 20 years ago, these were all regions. Today, we know there's not a single region that does anything. There's not a center in the brain. Everything is connected. It works like an ecosystem.
그리고 이제 그 뇌 주변 시스템이나 중앙이나 할 것 없이
Much more recently, that same insight has been started at the gut level. You see a lot of different cells here, and I don't need to emphasize this.
제가 이제 강조할 필요가 없을 정도로
This is the layer of cells that separate the lumen of the gut on this side and the outside of the wall. And you can see there's a lot of different cells. There's immune cells, there's nerve cells. The gut has like 100 million nerve cells, neurons in it. It has its own nervous system. And there's also these 100 trillion microbes. So this is the newcomer to this. And just imagine, I mean, this is only a few microns that separate this enormous community of very different types of microorganisms, including sometimes pathogens. From the immune cells, the biggest part of the immune cell of the body is in the gut, as is the nervous system, and as is shown here, the endocrine system. So most of the hormones in the body are produced by cells in the gut lining that signal back to the brain.
그래서
So what's
우리가
important
어떤
is that
정보를
anything,
인식을 하면은
without telling you now
이러한
the details that we
미생물들이
do
뇌에
know,
정보를 보냅니다.
anything that happens up at the brain level
그리고 이제
will always
뇌에서
be reflected at the
어떤 일이
gut
일어나건
level.
간에
Every
그러한
emotion
정보도
that you have,
그러한
just like you see it on your facial
환경과 그러한
expression,
변화도
if you pay
바로 장으로
attention,
연결이
the same thing
돼서
happens at the gut level.
미생물을
The
통해서
blood flow, the
연결되어 있습니다.
contractions, secretions,
이거를 바로
immune
우리가
activation.
장내
So if you're chronically angry, it
신경망이라고 하고
will
그다음에
change
뇌
the way
신경망이라고
your
합니다.
gut
그래서 우리가
functions.
화가 나거나
If you're happy, we don't really know this.
화가 나거나 이제
Science, there's very little science on positive emotions, unfortunately, because that's not funded by the
여러분이
by
긍정적인
national
감정을
organizations. It will probably come. I think there's some indications. But also, at the same time, everything that happens at the gut level will be sent to the brain. Most of the information in this circular system goes from the gut to the brain. 90% of all the information is sensory. Only a small amount comes down back to the gut. So what does all this information that comes from here do? And I'll tell you a few things. One is important is microorganisms we heard about before. So why would they sit there and why would they be important in this gut-brain communication? So, so it has to do a lot. So before I give you the answer to that question, let me just emphasize one thing as well.
정말 하나를 강조를
We are
하겠습니다.
citizens of the earth.
우리가 지구의
And we
시민들입니다.
interact with the earth in two ways, through our brain, through our senses,
지구와 두 가지로
through our actions and
두
reactions
가지로
of the environment to
커뮤니케이션 하고
us.
있습니다. 우리의
But now
감각과 우리의
with these
지식으로 하고 있습니다.
microorganisms
그런데
that
여기에
are larger,
미생물이
there's more
있습니다.
than stars in the galaxy.
근데 그
We are connected
미생물들은
to this
우리
ecosystem
은하계와
that makes
별들보다
up
더
the
많이
world.
있습니다.
there's a lot more microorganisms in the world than any other life form, and it has been the longest that it has existed. So this is really our connection. We are
이런 것은
connected
바로 우리의 그
both through the brain
연결적인데
and through the gut. We don't realize that what we're doing to our gut by not really paying much attention. We realize some of the things that happen at the brain level.
그래서 이제 뇌에서 일어나는 모든 일이 우리 실제로는 우리가 장에서 바로 느낄 수가 있습니다.
Just a couple of things about them. Many of you, this is in the meantime has sort of become common knowledge that if you put all these microbes together, so individually they're not visible. We also many of them we can't culture. But if you could put them all together into one clump, it would be an organ larger than or about the size of the liver, of between 1 and 2.5 kilos, larger than the brain, more cells than the brain, 100 billion cells in the brain, half of them are immune cells, and only 50 billion are nerve cells. So the microbes by far outnumber the number of these cells. What's more important than the number and the size of this is why does it connect us to the external environment? So these are life forms, microorganisms are life forms that have existed for billions of years, living in the
그리고
ocean.
사람과 이 미생물이 함께 35억 년 동안 함께 진화를 해왔습니다. 근데 이제 그때는 다른 거 할 것 없이 그냥 계속 진화만 해왔습니다. 그때 우리가 이제 5억 년 전에 5억 년 전에 가장 원시적인 형태의 동물이 나타났습니다. 그래서 그 가장 간단한 상태의 그 생물 그게 그 박테리아인데 이 박테리아 내에서 작은 신경 물질이 있어서 그때부터 계속 발달을 해왔습니다.
Living in symbiosis with these microorganisms that in some ways connect them to the natural environment. So the reason that they're so important is that it's not just the numbers, but it's the numbers of what they can do.
모든 사람들의 그 유전자는 2만 개 정도.
So between 7 and 10 million genes. That means they can produce a vast amount of things, only a very small portion of which we understand currently what they do. So a signaling system evolved over billions of years, enormous capacity. Many of them have been shown to be able to communicate to the brain. So the system that has that is evolving now, sticking with these systems view of life. So I told you about this, the microorganisms in our gut. We are the scientists beginning to understand that that all the cells that make up the body and the components, the genes and everything, is connected just like seen at the brain level, at the microbiome level. We have all these connectomes based on different things. And what makes up the human being is the interaction of all these connectomes with each other. So it's sort of like when you look at the galaxy, to understand what's going on there, this is probably even more complex than looking outside into space. I'm just scratching at the surface. One thing it is important, this system interacts with the environment in multiple ways, with the nature that we live in. So what are the practical suggestions that come out of this kind of new view of the systems view? So one is, if you look at the brain level, brain education and training, we've heard a lot about this, so I don't really I need to say much more about it. But because everything that goes in the brain has a reflection at our gut level and in the microbes that live in it, this is not just something that helps us to deal with the world better, but also it's beneficial for our gut health. Now, synchronizing brain-gut communication, these very complex pathways that go in both directions. So abdominal breathing, abdominal massage, belly button healing, we've heard about this. All these are ways to stimulate the gut to send different signals to the brain. In generally, all of these techniques have been shown to send positive signals to the brain. And then the thing as a gastroenterologist, I'm also very interested in is what I like to call farming the gut microbiome. So this is what's some of the principle, what's good for your microbiome is good for your brain health. we have lived with these organisms for a very long time, and they've adapted, so if we do something bad to them, it will hurt us as well. Some of the things are dietary: avoid animal fat, sugar, processed foods, antibiotics, and then take advantage of the healing power of plants. We know now that many plants that have healing effects, like turmeric, the olive oil, or the leaves of the olive tree, and the same thing about this Korean tree that that you're working on. All these have molecules in it. They're larger. They're too large for our small intestine to absorb them. So we now think that they actually are first digested by the bacteria and then affect the bacteria to use their signaling molecules to talk back to us. So a whole new area of understanding the various herbal or plant-based medicines. So I know how to answer this question. Many people are not aware of this. I think everybody in this room is aware that we are in this fundamental transformation in our concepts of the world. This is a good example of how in the past people have predicted when there were big changes going on technologically. I just want to emphasize the lowest one. So this was said not so long ago: biological processes are organized into simple pathways. I was actually trained in that paradigm. In just a relatively short time, this has completely gone by the wayside, and now we're in this very new way. So you've heard about earlier in a talk, so this concept, this model of a factory that we used for the last 100 years. So the human body and its organs as a factory with a conveyor belt and combustion engine that basically is a mechanical device modeled after the cars and the steam engines of 100 years ago. This is completely given way. It's still being used, for example, in surgery. We take out a bad organ, put a new one in. But for most chronic diseases, it's become obsolete. We are now at this place where we can beginning to understand the powers of the brain, the healing powers, and its major role in integrating our body with our environment. And this, our current model, and I'm sure it will change in the future again, is this of a supercomputer. Supercomputers have helped us to actually study these interactions. And I'm sure in 50 years from now, there will be a metaphor of something that we don't even know yet technologically. So just to summarize this, one of the other ways to express the systems view of the world is the ecological view, that everything in nature is organized in interactions of multiple parts that form a whole, and it's the interactions and the composition of these interactions that determines the health of an ecosystem. So we know this about natural ecosystems. We have destroyed a lot of them and are still in the process of doing this unabated, in terms of cutting down trees, using fertilizers, pesticides. And there's clearly this interaction that we're now realizing with climate change, with the ecosystem of Earth. What we're now also seeing is that the human body and its brain can be viewed as an ecosystem. Certainly we have learned this from the microbes. Only way we understand the microbial diversity and complexity is by studying, by using this kind of model. And at the center of this is really the brain. The brain is influenced and regulates many of these processes in our body. As I've shown you, a very close interaction with the gut, with the digestive tract. It makes decisions about our natural environment. It can do good things or bad things. And ultimately, this integration of three major systems in the world determines not only our own health, but also the health of the planet. So the fact that, so I'm showing the slide at this, I didn't really know exactly what the other talks would be. It fits pretty well that the brain power has center stage in this model. This is being supported by science, not just by the practical examples, amazing practical examples that we heard earlier, but it's also supported by the emerging science. So we're clearly in this paradigm shift that I think some scientists are grasping now. Still battles in study sections when you want to write a grant. If you write it too much in this direction, you won't get it because it's not reductionistic enough and mechanistic enough. But there's absolutely no question in my mind that this will dominate science in the future at all levels. So it's been mentioned. It's been mentioned earlier. So putting together many of these thoughts and probably the catalyst for getting me linked to Ilchi Lee and all these initiatives that he's doing has been the writing and the publication of my book. It will become available in Korean. It's available now on Amazon in 4 languages. Anyway, thank you again for the privilege to be here on this historical day. Thank you very much.